I'm thinking of cases, if we go back, let's say, to 1830s, there was a famous case in which the Supreme Court said that northern Georgia belongs to the Cherokee Indians. Why? Because we'd only signed 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 treaties promising that land. But the Georgians found gold there, and they said, we want the land, we want the gold. Forget about the Indians. And the Indians, being pretty civilized people, hired a lawyer, they brought a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court said, of course this land belongs to the Indians. And some of you may know about that case because Andrew Jackson, President of the United States, said, John Marshall, Chief Justice, Supreme Court, it's made its decision. Now let them enforce it. Ha ha. He didn't say ha ha, but that's the implication. And indeed, he sent troops, the President, to northern Georgia, but not to enforce the decision, but to evict the Indians. And he evicted the Indians. They traveled along the Trail of Tears, called that because so many died on the way. And their descendants, they lived in Oklahoma, which the tribe eventually reached. Now in history, that wasn't such a long time ago. And we had a civil war. We had a few other fairly bad decisions too. And now I like to think of a key decision which came later. When I was a child, I was about your age, actually. And in 1954, the Supreme Court said, we're looking around the South, and the South has legal segregation. It segregates people by race. Black children, one school, one drinking fountain, one park, always terrible. White school, better park, better drinking fountain. And that was their way of life. And it lived that way for about 80 years. But in 1954, the Supreme Court said, no, that's the end of it. One of the phrases here says, you cannot, no state shall deprive a person of equal protection of the law. And the Supreme Court said, but that is denying equal protection of the law. If you think that isn't denying equal protection of the law, there's something wrong with you, because just open your eyes and look and see what's going on. And we know what happened after they did that for 3 years. What happened next? They said that, absolutely clear, no getting around it, no way of fudging that. That was absolutely clear. And for the next 3 years, what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Well, let me be fair. President Eisenhower did desegregate the schools of the District of Columbia, but not much else. Remember, that's the group of 9 people, no purse, no sword. Obscure. Why do it? Some people in the South thought that. That's the question they asked. And they said, why do it? In fact, we won't. Now, in 1957, and this is the point that interests me, the Little Rock, Arkansas School Board began to get around to doing it. And with a judge down there, the judge says, you start integrating that school in 1957. They said, fine, we'll do it. And they found 9 black students. They're called Little Rock 9, very brave. And they agreed that they would try this out, they would do it. And September came, and the governor, Valvis, basically stood at the schoolhouse door, and he said, they're not coming in this school. And I have the troops. I have the state police. I have the militia. And there's a judge over there, too bad, state. I will not let them in. And there were huge crowds around the school. White citizens' councils, others that come all over the South, causing trouble. Well, ultimately, the Congress had arranged for the governor to go and see President Eisenhower. And he flew up to Newport, and Eisenhower said to him, well, he later said, Eisenhower, President Eisenhower dressed me down like a general dresses down a sergeant. And he told Eisenhower, don't worry, I'll integrate the school. And he went out the door and told the press the opposite. Eisenhower was a little annoyed. But now, what to do? The Attorney General of the United States said to Eisenhower, you have to send troops to enforce that court order. Jimmy Burns, who was the governor of South Carolina, who had been a friend of Harry Truman, and had been on the Supreme Court and had run the entire wartime peace mobilization effort in the United States, and was not a bigot. He said to Harry Truman, you can't send troops. He said to Eisenhower, you can't send troops. If you do, you will have to occupy the entire South. You think you can do that? It'll be a second Reconstruction. The best that will happen will be they'll close the schools and no one will be educated. So Eisenhower had a tough decision. And he made the decision. And he decided to send the troops. And he picked the 101st Airborne Division, and at that time, 57, every American knew who the 101st Airborne was. The 101st Airborne were real heroes of World War II. They had sent paratroopers into Normandy. And there were some directions that went wrong, and a lot of them just got hung up in their parachutes on the steeples, and they were shot down by the Germans while they're hanging there. But they accomplished their mission. They were heroes of the Battle of the Bulge. And Eisenhower purposely picked that division. He put 1,000 troops on airplanes. Those airplanes landed in Little Rock, Arkansas. The troops got off. They took those children and they escorted them right into that school. And the pictures of that went around the world. And that was a great day for the rule of law. And it was a great day for America. I'd like to tell you that was the end, but it wasn't. A year later, the school was closed. They closed it. There were many ups and downs. They reopened it again. There was the civil rights movement of the 60s. There was the bus boycott. There were all kinds of things that happened. But I like to think of that as the key moment. I like to think of that as the moment when the country decided they would follow the law. I told that story. There was a Russian paratroop general who came to the court. He came there because he'd been in charge of pointing all the missiles at the United States. And they changed the direction. So the State Department called up and said, we should be nice to this fellow. So I showed him around the court, and he said, what's your favorite case? And I told him about that case. I told him that story. And I said, it shows that the paratroopers and the judges must be friends. There's something to that. But that's part of a process that's an historical process. And now, today, it's the worst case I've written about in a long time. One of the bad ones I didn't like, I was in dissent. By the way, when I say it's a bad case, I don't mean the people who write it are bad people. I get on with them well. We all get on with each other well. But we have differences of opinion. And one of the cases I had a difference of opinion about was Bush versus Gore. I was in dissent. And the majority was 5 the other way. All right, so I heard Senator Reid say about that case, he said, he's a Democrat. And I'm sure he didn't like the case. He didn't like the majority. He was sorry it came out the way it did. But he said one of the most remarkable things in that case is something that people hardly ever remark. And that is 50% or more of the country thought it was just awful. I was one. I thought it was really wrong. But even though they thought it was just awful, and even though they thought it was terribly important, they followed it. They followed it. They did it. There was no violence in the streets. And I'll tell you, when I talk about that, as I do fairly well, from time to time anyway, I'm going to find 10% of the audience I talk to think or tell me, too bad there wasn't violence in the streets. There should have been. It was so wrong. And what I say is this, I say, really? That's what you really think? Hey, turn on that television set. Look occasionally at a news program. And you find out what countries and what life in those countries is like, where the way they solve their problems is through violence in the streets. Is that where you want to live? Is that how you want to live? Maybe you ought to think twice about that. And I think they get the point. And that's why Harry Reid said, one of the great treasures in America is just that we will follow cases, decisions that could be wrong by this court, which is really there to protect liberty when it's unpopular. And that's a hard thing to do. And that's what I'm trying to do in my book. What's the hard thing? To help you or others or your parents or others understand that our institution, the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, its job is in part to enforce the law when it's unpopular to do so. And so it requires the support of the public for an institution that will decide things that the public will find awful or unpopular. And by the way, the court may be wrong. Convince people of that when they're busy doing the shopping. Not so easy. Not so easy, but important. Now you see the two things. That's the point. I want you, one, to see, I hope, that this document foresees, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that the people who wrote it think that it won't work unless you and others participate in the democratic government that it creates. And the second thing is to do that, it's helpful if you know a little bit about the history and about the nature of the institutions, including the courts, that we've created over time to make up that government. All right? That's the message. So you got the homework part, you know how we do it. You've got the basic outline, that's what the Constitution is. You've got the history and what's important, and now you see the commercial message. That is, I hope you'll participate and learn about the government of the United States, including the courts. Thank you.